Are we opening the doors to help or to lose control? The migratory crisis is no longer a regional issue. It is a global phenomenon, accelerated by wars, economic collapses, political persecution, and social disasters. But behind compassion, there is a growing fear. Are we really welcoming people or disrupting our own countries? On the one hand, the appeal to solidarity. Families running away from authoritarian regimes, zones of war, hunger, violence. Desperate people trying to survive. Crossing deserts, seas, walls and borders. The scene is moving, hard to ignore. But on the other side, there are entire communities wondering, who will pay this bill? Who is entering my country? What is the impact of this on the economy, security, culture? European countries try to absorb millions of Ukrainian, Syrian and Afghan refugees while facing internal tensions, terrorist attacks and collapses in health and housing systems. The United States live an increasingly critical situation on the southern border, with massive flows from Latin America, Caribbean and even from Africa. Already South American countries face an unprecedented dilemma. Brazil, Colombia, Peru and Chile try to deal with the mass immigration of Venezuelans, Haitians and other nationalities, often without minimal infrastructure for this. Is it solidarity or national suicide? We are facing one of the most difficult questions of the 21st century. How far is our moral obligation to welcome each other before it threatens our own future? Get ready, because in this video we will not romanticize reality. Let's look at the data, the arguments and the contradictions, and in the end, the decision is yours. Are we building bridges or digging our own trenches? Humanity has always migrated. Since older times, human groups travel in search of survival, running away from wars, persecution, hunger, or natural disasters. But what we have been seeing in recent decades is something different. Migratory flows on a fast and disorganized scale. According to data from the International Organization for Migration, IM, more than 280 million people live today outside their home countries, the largest number ever recorded in modern history. This number has grown more than 60% in the last 3 decades. But it's not just quantity, it is speed, intensity, and political impact. The Syrian migratory crisis, which exploded in 2015, caused an unprecedented shock in Europe. More than 5 million people running away from the civil war. Countries like Germany and Sweden opened their doors, while others such as Hungary and Poland raised physical and ideological walls. In 2022, with the war in Ukraine, Europe was the scene of a new wave of travel. More than 8 million Ukrainian refugees sought shelter in neighboring countries in record time. This time the reception was broader, but it also revealed unequal treatment. While Ukrainians were received with solidarity, refugees from African and Arabs continued to face rejection. In the United States, the situation on the Mexico border has become a time bomb. Each month, thousands of migrants cross the desert trying to enter illegally. Many come from Central America, running away from cartels, extreme poverty and bankrupt states. Others come from the Caribbean, Africa, or even Asia. By 2023, the US broke a record of border arrests, over 2.4 million in a single year. In Latin America, the most emblematic case is that of Venezuela. Since 2015, more than 7.7 million Venezuelans have left the country. Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Brazil and Chile saw their migrant populations shoot in a few years, overloading public services and creating local tensions. In many cities, there was an increase in occupations, informal unemployment and social conflicts. And don't stop there. In Southern Asia, countries such as Bangladesh and India face internal and external migrant flows due to climate change, flooding and ethnic religious tensions. In Africa, millions escape civil conflicts, extremist groups and chronic misery. Part of these migrants risks life in the Mediterranean, trying to reach Europe in precarious boats. Thousands die along the way, and those who arrive are not always welcome. The question is repeated in different languages and borders. What to do when solidarity is shocked by the real capacity of a country to welcome? Governments are divided between two speeches. the humanitarian, who sees the welcome as a moral obligation, and basic law, and the sovereign, who defends the protection of borders, national identity, and the internal system. Both sides claim to be trying to avoid collapse. But who is right? Behind the technical discussion, laws, borders, seen and treated, is a much deeper dilemma. To what extent does a country have a duty to open its doors? And when does this duty become a threat to national stability itself? Mass immigration divides the world not only into policies, but into values. On the one hand are those who defend unrestricted welcome in the name of compassion, justice, and human rights. On the other, those who warn of the economic, social, and cultural impact of the accelerated and disorganized arrival of millions of people. Let's start with the arguments in favor of immigration. For opening advocates, no human being can be considered illegal. The idea that national borders should be insurmountable barriers is, according to them, outdated and inhuman in the face of realities that force so many people to flee their countries. Immigration from this point of view is not a threat, but a direct consequence of global inequality, and therefore a shared responsibility. In addition, there is the economic argument. Many developed countries are facing the aging of the population, very low birth rates and labor shortages in essential sectors. Young immigrants willing to work can fill these gaps, pay taxes, and keep active areas such as agriculture, construction, and care for the elderly. In Germany, for example, many of the refugees who arrived from Syria between the years of 2000 and 2017 were inserted in the labor market and became part of the country's productive force. In the United States, there are studies that indicate that over the years immigrants contribute more to taxes than they receive on social benefits. In Portugal, the increase in the immigrant population has been supporting critical sectors of the economy, especially those involving manual and physical work that local citizens no longer want to exercise. Another strong argument is that of cultural diversity. Immigrants bring new languages, religions, cooking, art forms, and worldviews. Defenders of this idea remember that many modern societies, such as the American and the Canadian, were built by people of different origins who transformed these countries into economic and cultural powers. Denying immigration, according to this group, would be a way of denying the very history of human civilization. But critics of mass immigration are not only motivated by prejudice or nationalism. There is a legitimate concern with the practical and structural impacts that large migratory flows cause when they are not well planned. The first point raised is the collapse in public systems. When thousands of people come suddenly, often undocumented and without resources, essential services such as health, education, and housing are the first to suffer. Hospitals are overcrowded, schools cannot absorb the demand, and the lack of housing generates irregular occupations and makeshift slums. Then comes insecurity and social instability. In various regions of Europe, neighborhoods arose where racial and religious tensions intensified with the arrival of immigrants. There were protests, clashes with the police, and in some cases, violent attacks on extremists who infiltrated migratory flows. In France, for example, peripheral neighborhoods became zones of tension with high rates of unemployment, violence, and radicalization. In Sweden, known for its open doors policy, there was an increase in crime in areas where social integration has failed. Another recurring argument is that of national identity. Critics fear that the arrival of cultures with very different values, especially on topics such as religion, women's rights, and freedom of expression, can destabilize social cohesion. The question is it possible to live in peace with groups that reject the democratic principles of the country that welcomes them? Or are we, under the pretext of tolerance, making room for future conflicts? In the United States, the debate on immigration on the Mexico border intensifies with each election. Many argue that lack of migratory control represents a threat, not only economic, but also to national security. Fear is not only in poor immigrants, but in the possibility of criminals, traffickers, and extremists enter without control. In South America, the situation was reversed. Countries that previously exported migrants began to receive massive flows, as in the case of Venezuela. Peru, Chile, Colombia, and Brazil had to absorb hundreds of thousands of people in a short time. This generated unemployment, increased informal economy, growth of xenophobia and protests in several cities. The question remains the same. How far does the reception go before it becomes instability? Immigration advocates respond that the key is in inclusion, integration and investment. Critics say no public system resists this pace and that the priority should be the local population. Both sides have examples. On the one hand, immigrants who opened business, created jobs, enriched culture and contributed to the economy. On the other, marginalized neighborhoods, crime growth, social tension and difficulty adaptation. And there is still a political layer that needs to be considered: the instrumentalization of immigration. Left and right politicians use the theme as a weapon. For some, the reception has become a symbol of moral superiority. For others, the fear of the immigrant is explored to win elections. While the speeches shock themselves, the real impacts are the citizens, both those who arrive and those who were already. The migratory crisis is not just about physical borders. It reveals the limits of solidarity, tolerance, and sovereignty. We are between two extremes: blind humanism and radical nationalism. Finding a balance has become the biggest challenge of our time. Mass immigration opens a tension that many countries prefer to avoid: the conflict between the ideals we defend and the limits that, in practice, we cannot sustain. On the one hand, the principle of solidarity, the idea that everyone deserves a second chance, that no one should be condemned to misery, fear, or war for being born in the wrong place. It is a noble ideal, but too ideal to apply without consequences. On the other hand, the concrete reality of borders, laws, culture, and sovereignty. Because a country is not just a territory, it is a set of values, rules, social structures, and commitments to its own population. And when the mass arrival of people break this balance, compassion gives way to distrust, and the welcome becomes a crisis. The question that no one wants to answer directly is simple and brutal. To what extent are we willing to help before destroying what we are trying to protect? Immigration can be an opportunity, yes, but it can also be a time bomb if done in a chaotic way, without control and without debate. The problem is not in opening the doors. The problem is not knowing until when they can remain open. Is it possible to keep your arms open without losing the backbone? Is it possible to welcome the other without erasing one's own identity? Is it possible to defend human rights without sacrificing the stability of a nation? These questions have no easy answers, and perhaps there are no unique answers. But one thing is certain: pretending that there is no problem is the worst possible answer. Because when solidarity becomes taboo and national security becomes synonymous with prejudice, society to think and begins to react. And extreme reactions on both sides always charge a high price. Now the choice is in the hands of those who watch. Do you believe we are facing a humanitarian crisis or an announced collapse? We must keep welcoming without limits. Or is it time to redefine the borders of what we call justice? Leave your opinion in the comments. The debate begins now and its side matters. If this video made you reflect, like, share and subscribe to the channel. Here, the controversy is not avoided, she is faced.